The night began softly. King Saul sat alone in his tent, the warm flicker of candlelight casting shadows across the aged parchment of his scrolls. It was a small sanctuary, offering a moment of peace. Outside, the winds whispered through the trees, gentle, like a lullaby. It was a rare comfort, a gift in these troubled times. As Saul leaned back, he closed his eyes, breathing in the warmth. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to forget the battles, the whispers of rebellion, the haunting silence of his God who seemed to have left him. But something strange tugged at his mind, a feeling like a faint murmur in a crowded room, distant yet impossible to ignore. His hand drifted toward his sword, fingers tracing its cold hilt, though he could hear nothing out of place. Then it began, the smallest of sounds. The flicker of the candle seemed to falter, casting shadows that danced unnaturally, as if something unseen lurked just beyond the tent walls. The light dimmed, shivering, as if the warmth had been sucked from the air. Saul's breath hitched. He told himself it was nothing, just the wind. But then he saw it, a figure, faint yet unmistakable, hovering in the dim corner of his tent. It was an old man robed in shadow, his face pale as moonlight, his eyes closed. Saul's heart pounded. He knew this face, though he had not seen it in years. The prophet Samuel had been dead for what felt like a lifetime. Yet here he was, summoned by the king's own desperation. Samuel, Saul's voice was barely a whisper, cracking with terror and disbelief. Samuel's eyes opened. They were dark, hollow, as if filled with an endless void. He said nothing, only stared at Saul with a sorrowful intensity that made the king's skin crawl. A shiver passed through Saul's body, cold and relentless. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Why have you disturbed me?" Samuel's voice was a whisper, chilling as the deepest winter night. The words struck Saul like a blow. He wanted to explain himself, to beg for guidance, but his voice failed him. All he managed was a stammered plea, desperate, fearful. "The Philistines, they are closing in. I don't know what to do. God has left me, and..." Samuel's gaze hardened. His form began to waver, shifting in the candlelight, becoming darker, more distorted. Shadows spilled out of him, creeping along the floor like living tendrils, closing in on Saul. The tent felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls were pressing inward. Suddenly, the shadows vanished. The candle flared back to life, filling the tent with its comforting warmth. The chill lifted, and Saul felt a foolish sense of relief, as though he had just awoken from a terrible dream. He let out a breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But then he noticed something, a quiet scratching sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from beneath his feet. His gaze dropped to the floor, where the shadows of his own form seemed to be moving. They twisted and warped, like something alive reaching toward him. Saul took a step back, heart hammering in his chest. The scratching grew louder, now coming from all around him. He felt the walls closing in once more, the light dimming, the warmth retreating. Samuel's face appeared once more in the shadows, this time twisted with something darker than sorrow. A mocking grin, one that hinted at horrors beyond imagination. "You asked for me," Samuel's voice echoed, low and resonant, "and I came." The shadows swallowed Saul's scream, leaving nothing but silence in the tent. The candle flickered one last time, before it snuffed out completely, leaving only darkness, cold and eternal. And somewhere, hidden in the silent depths of that darkness, Saul felt a presence lingering, watching, waiting. He knew then that this was no dream, no passing horror. It was the beginning of an endless nightmare, and he would never escape.